My family tried forcing me to pay $250K for my brother's debt. Then Dad threw wine at my face. Hi, my name is Riley. I'm 32, a financial analyst living in Boise, Idaho. And this is the story of how Thanksgiving dinner turned into the night I finally understood what I meant to my family. Not a daughter, not a sister, just a checkbook. Before I tell you how everything flipped, like and subscribe. Drop a comment and let me know where you are watching from. Thanksgiving should have been warm. It should have smelled like roasted turkey and my mother's cinnamon-dusted apple pie. The air should have been filled with the low murmur of football on the television and the easy laughter of people who loved each other. It should have been safe. That's the word I kept coming back to as I drove the 3 hours from my quiet apartment in Boise to my parents' house in Idaho Falls. Safe. I wanted to feel safe. Instead, I sat at a polished oak table that gleamed under the soft light of the dining room chandelier. Every fork was in its place. Every glass was spotless. It was a perfect picture of a perfect family, but the air was tight, stretched thin like a wire. I could feel it, a low hum of anticipation that had nothing to do with dessert. My brother Kevin sat across from me, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. His wife Jessica sat beside him, her posture perfect, a placid expression on her face that I knew was a mask. My mother was clearing the last of the plates with a manufactured slowness, while my father leaned back in his chair at the head of the table, watching me, just watching me. The silence was the first sign that something was wrong. In our family, silence was never peaceful. It was a weapon. It was the quiet before the storm, the space where expectations were left to grow and fester. I took a slow sip of water, the glass cool against my hand. I tried to think of something to say, something normal. I could ask about my dad's golf game or my mom's garden club, but the words felt like sand in my mouth. It was clear they were the ones directing this scene, and I was just waiting for my cue. Finally, my mother returned from the kitchen. She wasn't carrying the pie. Her hands were empty except for a small, dark blue velvet box. It looked like a ring box, or maybe something for a necklace. She walked to the table with a strange formality, her steps measured and deliberate. She didn't look at me. She just placed the box on the table, right in front of my empty plate, and slid it forward. The velvet made a soft, hissing sound against the polished wood. "We have something for you, honey," she said, her voice a little too bright. My heart gave a stupid, hopeful little jump. For a second, just a split second, the tension in the room vanished, replaced by a flicker of warmth. Maybe I had been wrong. Maybe the strained silence was just tiredness. Maybe this was an olive branch, a sign that they were finally proud of me. I had closed a huge deal at work last month, my biggest yet. Maybe they had heard about it. Maybe this was a gift to celebrate that, a token of pride. I imagined a small, delicate necklace, something I could wear to remind me that deep down, they did care. I reached for the box, my fingers tracing its soft edges. It felt real, substantial. I looked up at my mother, and she gave me a tight, encouraging nod. My father leaned forward, his elbows on the table, his eyes sharp and unblinking. There was no warmth in his gaze, only intensity. That should have been my second warning. I opened the lid. There was no necklace, no sparkling earrings, no sentimental piece of jewelry. Inside, nestled against the white satin lining, was a single piece of paper, folded into a neat, small square. My brow furrowed in confusion. I looked up at my mom, a question in my eyes, but she just gestured toward the paper, her expression unreadable. Slowly, I lifted the paper out of the box. It was thick, official feeling. As I unfolded it, the letterhead came into view. It was from a bank. My stomach tightened into a cold, hard knot. It was a loan default notice. I scanned the lines of sterile black text, my eyes searching for a name, an amount, an explanation. The name was my brother's, Kevin R. Thompson. The amount was printed in bold, unforgiving numbers, $250,000. I read the number again, convinced I had made a mistake. $250,000. It was an impossible sum, a life-changing amount of debt. I looked across the table at Kevin. He wasn't smiling anymore. He was just watching me, a flicker of something. Defiance? Desperation? In his eyes. His wife, Jessica, was suddenly very interested in a loose thread on her napkin. My gaze shifted to my father. He hadn't moved. He was still leaning forward, his hands clasped on the table. When he spoke, his voice was low and flat, stripped of all emotion. It was the voice he used when he was giving an order he knew would not be questioned. "You'll cover this." It wasn't a question. It wasn't a plea for help. It was a statement of fact, a law being passed down from a king to a subject. The air in my lungs seemed to evaporate. I stared at him, trying to process the words, the sheer audacity of them, the velvet box, the dramatic reveal. It was all a performance, a carefully staged trap, and I had walked right into it. I finally found my voice, but it came out as a whisper. "What is this?" "It's a business loan that went bad," Kevin mumbled, not looking at me. "The market shifted. It's not my fault. We can't let this ruin him, Riley," my mother said, her voice soft and pleading. It was her classic role, the gentle mediator, the one who smoothed things over, but always in service of my brother. "He has a family to think about. Your nephew. They were using my nephew." Of course they were. They were pulling out every tool they had. I looked back at the paper in my hand. $250,000. I thought about how hard I had worked to get where I was. The years of studying, of working 2 jobs to get through college without debt. The late nights at the office, the weekends spent poring over market analyses. The careful saving, the disciplined investing, the small, simple apartment I was so proud of. Every dollar I had was a testament to a sacrifice I had made, and they were looking at it like it was a community resource, a family fund that they were entitled to. My hands started to shake. I put the paper down on the table, my fingers feeling numb. "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it landed in the center of the silent room like a stone. It felt heavy, dangerous. My father's eyes narrowed. "What did you say?" "I said no," I repeated, my voice a little stronger this time. I looked at him directly, at the man who was supposed to protect me, who was supposed to be my father. "This is Kevin's debt, not mine." A muscle twitched in my dad's jaw. Kevin scoffed, a bitter, entitled sound. "Wow, Riley, I see how it is. Now that you're making big money, you're too good for your own family." "This isn't about being too good," I said, my voice rising. "This is about responsibility. You took out the loan. You have to pay it back. It's not that simple," my mother insisted. "The bank will take their house." Then maybe he should have thought about that before he borrowed $250,000. The rage on my father's face was sudden and terrifying. It was a darkness that shuddered over his features, erasing any trace of the man I called Dad. He looked at me with pure, unadulterated fury, as if my refusal was not just a disagreement, but a deep, personal betrayal. "You ungrateful child," he snarled, his voice a low growl, and then it happened. It happened so fast I barely had time to react. His hand shot out, grabbing his half-full glass of red wine. I saw the dark liquid slosh against the sides. With a furious, sharp movement, he threw it. The glass didn't just tip over. It flew from his hand, a projectile aimed directly at me. I flinched back, but it was too late. The glass shattered against the wall just behind my shoulder, but the contents hit me full in the chest. A shocking, cold splash of red wine soaked through my white blouse, the liquid instantly spreading, staining the fabric a deep, ugly crimson. It dripped down my chin, cold and sticky against my skin. The sharp, fermented smell filled my nostrils. For a moment, there was a stunned, absolute silence. The only sound was the slow, rhythmic drip, drip, drip of wine falling from my shirt onto the pristine oak floor. I sat there, frozen, the cold seeping into my skin, my heart hammering against my ribs. I looked at my father. His chest was heaving, his face still contorted with rage. I looked at my mother. She had her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide, but she didn't move toward me. She didn't say a word. Kevin and Jessica just stared, their faces blank, like spectators at a show. No one rushed to help me. No one asked if I was okay. No one condemned what my father had just done. Their silence was their answer. It was their agreement. My refusal had made me the enemy, and in their eyes I deserved this. And just like that, the truth I had been avoiding my entire life slammed down on me with the force of a physical blow. The years of subtle favoritism, of quiet sacrifices I was expected to make, of feeling like an outsider in my own home, it all crystallized in that single, violent moment. I wasn't their daughter. I wasn't their sister. I was their emergency fund, their safety net, their funding, and I had just been declared worthless. Slowly, deliberately, I picked up my napkin and wiped the wine from my face. My hands were steady now. The shock was gone, replaced by a cold, clear certainty. I stood up, the chair scraping softly against the floor. My father's glare was a physical force. If you walk out that door, don't bother coming back. I looked at him, at the wine staining my shirt like a wound, and I finally saw him for what he was. Not a father, but a warden. This wasn't a home. It was a bank, and my love had been the interest they were happy to collect until they decided to cash in the principal. "Don't worry," I said, my voice calm and even. "I won't." I turned and walked out of the dining room, leaving the velvet box, the debt notice, and the shattered pieces of my family behind me. Growing up in our small, two-story house in Idaho Falls, favoritism wasn't a secret. It wasn't something whispered behind closed doors. It was the air we breathed. It was the foundation of our family, the unspoken law that governed every interaction, every decision, every holiday. My brother Kevin was the sun. My parents, and by extension I, were just planets orbiting him, our paths dictated by his gravitational pull. He was the golden boy, and I was the responsible one. That's what they always called me. Riley is so responsible. It was meant to be a compliment, I think, but it never felt like one. It felt like a job title, a role I was assigned at birth without ever auditioning for it. Responsibility wasn't about being praised. It was about being expected to handle things. It meant my achievements were met with a nod, and my failures were met with disappointment. While Kevin's achievements were cause for citywide parades, and his failures were just unfortunate mishaps, never his fault. The evidence was everywhere, etched into the very walls of our home. The main shelf in the living room was what my mom called Kevin's Wall of Fame. It was crowded with his trophies, Little League baseball trophies, soccer participation medals, a shiny plaque for most improved on the junior high basketball team. Each one was polished weekly. Below them were framed photos of him. Kevin crossing the finish line in a fun run. He came in 47th. Kevin in his ill-fitting football uniform. Kevin holding up a string of fish he'd caught at the lake with Dad. My accomplishments were kept in a shoebox under my bed. Report cards with straight A's, certificates for winning the school spelling bee 2 years in a row, a blue ribbon from the state science fair for a project on volcanic rock formations. When I brought home the science fair ribbon, I was buzzing with pride. I had spent weeks on that project, carefully labeling rocks and writing out my research on a trifold board. My teacher had told me it was one of the best projects she'd ever seen. I ran into the house, holding the ribbon up. "Mom, Dad, look! I won first place!" My dad glanced up from the newspaper. "That's nice, honey." "Good job." He went right back to reading the sports page. My mom was in the kitchen on the phone with my aunt. She put her hand over the receiver. "Oh, that's wonderful, sweetie. See? All that hard work paid off. Now, could you be a little quieter? I'm on the phone. There was no celebration. No phone call to Grandma to share the good news." The ribbon was never framed. It was just another expectation met. Riley is the smart one. Of course she won. That night, we had spaghetti for dinner because Kevin had failed his history midterm, and my mom said he needed his favorite meal to cheer him up. His failure was an event that required management and comfort. My success was a non-event. It was just Tuesday. The financial dynamic was established just as early. From the time I was 12, I was babysitting for neighbors, mowing lawns, and saving every dollar in a glass jar I kept on my dresser. I was saving up for a class trip to Washington, D.C. in the 8th grade. It cost $500 and I was determined to pay for it myself. I watched that jar fill up with ones and fives, a tangible representation of my hard work. One afternoon, I came home from school to find my dad looking worried at the kitchen table, a stack of bills in front of him. The car needed a new transmission, he said. It was going to be expensive, and they were a little short that month. "How much do you have in that jar of yours, Riley?" he asked, not looking at me. I knew immediately where this was going. "It's for my DC trip, Dad." I know, he said, sighing dramatically. "It's just, we're in a real bind here. I'll pay you back, of course." The moment my next check comes in, my mom came over and put her hand on my shoulder. "It's for the family, sweetie. Sometimes we have to make sacrifices for the family." Family. That was the magic word. It was the word used to justify every imbalance, every unfairness. I felt a hot knot of resentment in my stomach, but I was 13. What could I do? I went to my room, emptied the entire jar of carefully counted bills onto my bed, and handed over $287 to my dad. He never paid me back. When I asked about it a few weeks later, he got angry. "Don't you think I know I owe you money? Things are tight right now, Riley. Don't be so selfish." I never went on the DC trip. I told my friends I was sick. It was easier than explaining that my family had used my savings to fix their car, and then called me selfish for asking for it back. That was the year I opened my first savings account at the bank, a place where my money could be safe from the people who were supposed to keep me safe. But the ultimate sacrifice came when I was a senior in high school. The biggest one. The one that, looking back, set the stage for that Thanksgiving dinner 20 years later. I was a good student. More than good, I was driven. My grades were nearly perfect, and my one dream was to get out of Idaho, to see the world. I had applied to a study abroad program in London for my first year of college, a highly competitive scholarship program, and I got in. I remember the day the acceptance letter arrived. It was a thick, cream-colored envelope with a British postmark. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely tear it open. When I read the words, "We are pleased to offer you a place," I started screaming with joy. London. I was going to London. I was going to see Big Ben and ride the tube and study Shakespeare in the city where he lived. It felt like my life was finally about to begin, a life that was my own, one that I had earned. My parents were happy for me, in their own way. "London, huh?" my dad said, impressed despite himself. "Don't let those Brits teach you to talk funny." But 2 months before I was scheduled to leave, my dad had a health scare. He needed gallbladder surgery. It wasn't life-threatening. It was a routine laparoscopic procedure, but our family's health insurance wasn't great, and the out-of-pocket cost was going to be significant. The same week, Kevin, who was a freshman at the local community college, crashed his car. He wasn't hurt, but the car was totaled. He claimed someone had cut him off. Years later, I found out he had been drinking. Suddenly, money was a crisis. The conversations at the dinner table became hushed and stressed. I heard my parents arguing late at night through the thin walls of my bedroom. The words surgery, deductible, and new car for Kevin were repeated over and over. My name, and the word scholarship, started to creep into their arguments. The family meeting was held on a Sunday afternoon. It was my dad, my mom, and me. Kevin was conveniently out with his friends. My dad, looking pale and tired, laid it all out. The surgery costs. The need for Kevin to have a car to get to his classes. There just wasn't enough money to go around. "Riley," my mom started, her voice gentle and sad. It was her weapon of choice. "We are so proud of you. You know that, but family has to come first. What does that mean?" I asked, my heart starting to pound. I knew what it meant. "The scholarship covers your tuition," my dad said, "but you'd still need money for your flight, your living expenses, all the extras. That's money we just don't have right now. Money we need for other things, for him, for Kevin." "You're so smart, honey," my mom continued, reaching across the table to take my hand. "You can go to college anywhere. You could enroll at Boise State. You'd get scholarships there too. You could live at home for a year or two to save money. It would be a huge help to us." They weren't asking me. They were telling me. The decision had already been made. My dream was being dismantled in front of me to pay for my father's routine surgery and my brother's irresponsibility. "But it's London," I whispered, the words feeling pathetic and small. "London will still be there in a few years," my dad said dismissively. "You'll understand one day, Riley. Family sacrifices for each other. It's just what you do." But it wasn't family sacrificing. It was just me, sacrificing for them. I looked at their faces, my father's etched with worry and self-pity, my mother's with a soft, pleading sadness. They genuinely believed what they were saying. They believed they were entitled to my dream. They saw it as a resource, a liquid asset that could be repurposed to solve their more important problems. I gave up the scholarship. I wrote a deferral letter I never intended to use, my tears blotting the ink on the page. I enrolled at Boise State. I didn't live at home. That was one boundary I managed to draw, but I felt the ghost of that London dream every single day. It became the fuel for my independence. It was the memory that pushed me to work harder, to save more, to build a life so solid and so far away from them that they could never take anything from me again. I thought I had succeeded. I thought the walls I had built were high enough. But as I stood in my parents' dining room with red wine soaking my shirt, I realized I had made a critical mistake. I thought the game was over. But for them, it had just been halftime, and they had come back expecting me to fund the second half. The lesson I was supposed to have learned as a child, that my purpose was to serve their needs, was a lesson they never intended for me to forget. The day I moved into my first off-campus apartment in Boise was the day I started to breathe again. It was a tiny, rundown one-bedroom with a temperamental radiator and a view of a brick wall, but it was mine. Every mismatched piece of furniture was scrounged from a thrift store. Every plate and fork was a hand-me-down, but it was a kingdom. My kingdom. The most beautiful thing in it was the new lock on the front door, a lock to which only I had the key. That lock represented the one thing I craved more than anything: security. Not just physical security, but financial security. To me, money wasn't about luxury or status. It was about freedom. It was the ability to say no. It was the wall I was building, brick by painful brick, between the life I wanted and the family that thought they owned it. The ghost of my lost London scholarship was a constant companion, a quiet, persistent whisper in my ear. Never again. Never let them have that kind of power over you again. College wasn't a glamorous, movie-like experience for me. It was a grind. While other students were going to football games and frat parties, I was juggling a full course load in finance with 2, sometimes 3, part-time jobs. From 6 in the morning until noon, I was a waitress at a Greasy Spoon diner near campus, the smell of bacon and stale coffee clinging to my clothes all day. My apron pockets were always full of sticky coins and crumpled dollar bills. After my classes, I would go to the local hospital, where I worked in the medical records department until midnight, filing endless stacks of paperwork in a cold, sterile basement. The silence of that basement was a relief after the chaos of the diner. It was a place where I could think. I slept maybe 4 or 5 hours a night. My diet consisted of instant ramen, peanut butter sandwiches, and the leftover toast I could sometimes sneak from the diner kitchen. I was constantly exhausted, a low-level hum of fatigue running through my body at all times. There were nights I would fall asleep at my desk, my face pressed against the pages of a textbook on macroeconomic theory, and wake up with the words imprinted on my cheek. My family, of course, didn't understand it. They saw my refusal to live at home as an act of rebellion, an insult. My mother would call me, her voice laced with guilt. "We just worry about you, Riley. All alone in that big city. You look so tired in the pictures you post." What she meant was, why are you making this so hard on yourself when you could be here, helping us? They still asked for money. Kevin was always in some kind of jam. His car would break down, or he'd be short on rent, or he'd have an unexpected expense. The calls would always come from my mother. "Kevin just needs a little help to get back on his feet," she'd say. "Just $100 until he gets paid." In the beginning, I'd sometimes give in, sending them a small amount from my meager savings. But I learned quickly. The money was never paid back, and the requests only became more frequent. The day I finally said no to her, my voice shaking over the phone, was a turning point. "I can't, Mom. I'm barely making it myself." The coldness in her voice was immediate. "Well, I guess we know where your priorities are. I hope all that studying is worth more than your own brother." The line went dead. The silence that followed was both painful and liberating. I had disappointed her, but I had protected myself. It was the first brick in my wall. I graduated with honors, and more importantly, I graduated with zero debt. While my friends were talking about their staggering student loans, I had nothing but a diploma and a few $1,000s in my savings account, scraped together one sticky dollar at a time. It was the proudest achievement of my life. I got a job at a small investment firm in downtown Boise. The starting salary was modest, but it was more money than I had ever seen. My first real paycheck felt like a sacred object. I remember sitting in my car, holding it in my hands and crying, not because of the amount, but because of what it represented. It was mine. I had earned it. No one could lay claim to it. Work became my sanctuary. At home, my value was based on what I could give up. At work, my value was based on what I could build. I loved the clean logic of numbers, the way they didn't lie or manipulate. I loved the rhythm of the market, the challenge of finding patterns in the chaos. I wasn't the responsible one at work. I was the sharp one, the reliable one. My boss, a tough but fair man named Mr. Davison, saw my hunger. He saw the hours I put in, staying late long after everyone else had gone home, running analyses and building financial models. I poured everything I had into my career. My 20s were a blur of long hours, working lunches and professional certification exams. I climbed the ladder steadily. Junior analyst, senior analyst. With each promotion came a bigger salary, and with each salary increase, my wall grew higher. I didn't live extravagantly. I drove a 10-year-old Honda. I bought my clothes from outlet stores. I cooked my own meals. Every spare dollar went into my investments. A diversified portfolio of mutual funds, index funds, and a few carefully chosen stocks. I was building a fortress of financial independence. By the time I turned 30, I had saved enough for a down payment on my own place. It wasn't a house. It was a condominium on the 7th floor of a modern building in the heart of Boise. The day I closed the deal, I felt a sense of peace I had never known. I walked through the empty rooms, the sound of my footsteps echoing on the polished hardwood floors. The living room had a huge window that looked out over the city, the lights twinkling below like a field of fallen stars. This was it. This was the life I had built from the scraps of a broken dream. This was my proof that I could not only survive without them, but thrive. I thought, foolishly, that my success would change things. I thought that if I could show them this tangible proof of my hard work, the beautiful apartment, the impressive job title, they would finally see me, not as a resource but as a person. I imagined them visiting, my dad looking out the window and saying, "Wow, Riley, you really did it." I imagined my mom admiring my kitchen, telling me she was proud. The first time they visited, it was for my 30th birthday. I spent a week cleaning the apartment until it shone. I bought expensive cheese and crackers. I picked out a nice bottle of wine. I was nervous and excited, a little girl again, desperate for their approval. They walked in, and my mom's first comment was, "Goodness, Riley, what are the condo fees on a place like this? It must be astronomical." My dad walked over to the window, but he wasn't looking at the view. He was looking at the construction happening on the building across the street. "They're putting up another one of these, huh? Bet the property values are going to skyrocket. Smart investment." Kevin, who had come with them, just whistled. "Man, you must be loaded. My place is half this size and I can barely make rent." The entire visit was like that. They didn't ask me about my work, not really. They didn't ask if I was happy. They asked me about interest rates, about my 401k, about the Boise housing market. They looked at my life and saw a balance sheet. They toured my apartment not as a home, but as an asset. When they left, my mom hugged me at the door. "We are so proud of what you have," she whispered in my ear. "What you have, not who you are." I closed the door behind them and leaned against it, the perfect silent apartment suddenly feeling cold and empty. I had built a fortress to keep them out, but I had secretly, desperately hoped they would want to come inside. I finally understood that they had no interest in the person living in the fortress. They were just admiring the height of the walls, calculating their value. The 2 weeks leading up to that final, fateful Thanksgiving were quiet. Work was demanding as we were heading into the end-of-year reporting cycle. I was putting in 10-hour days, my mind consumed by spreadsheets and market projections. The long hours were a welcome distraction. They kept me from thinking too much, from feeling the familiar ache of loneliness that often crept in as the holidays approached. I had spent the last 3 Thanksgivings on my own. Once I flew to Mexico for a week, lying on a beach and reading novels. The other 2 years, I hosted a small orphan's Thanksgiving at my apartment for friends who also weren't going home. We'd cook a small turkey, drink too much wine, and complain about our families. It was comfortable. It was safe. I had planned to do the same this year. My friend Sarah and I had already started debating stuffing recipes. Then, my phone buzzed. It was a Tuesday night. I was on my couch, eating takeout salad from a plastic container and reviewing a client portfolio on my laptop. I glanced at the screen. It was a text from my mother. My stomach did a familiar little flip-flop, a mix of dread and a flicker of hope I couldn't seem to extinguish. The message was 5 simple words. "Come home. We miss you." I stared at the text for a long time. The words looked so innocent on the screen, so full of warmth and love. Come home, as if it were still my home. "We miss you." As if they missed me, Riley, the person, and not just my potential utility. There were no follow-up texts, no explanation, just that simple, powerful request. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. 1,000 responses ran through my head. "I'm busy. I already have plans, why?" But I didn't type any of them. Part of me, the logical wounded part, knew this was a summons, not an invitation. They hadn't called on my birthday a few months earlier. They hadn't asked how my big work project went. Their silence was a constant presence in my life, and it was only ever broken when they needed something. But another part of me, a younger, more foolish part, wanted to believe. It was the part of me that still remembered the smell of my mom's baking, the rare sound of my dad's genuine laughter, the feeling of being a family, even if it was just a fleeting illusion. The holidays made me weak. The onslaught of commercials showing happy families gathered around a fireplace, the cheerful music in every store, it all wore down my defenses. It made me crave a fantasy I knew wasn't real. Maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. Maybe they had changed. Maybe they finally wanted to connect. The next day at lunch, I showed the text to Sarah. She read it, her expression immediately skeptical. Sarah was a lawyer. She was trained to see the subtext, the hidden clauses in every interaction. She had been my friend since my first year in Boise, my confidant through every family-related drama. She knew the whole story, from the lost scholarship to the endless requests for money. "Don't do it," she said, taking a bite of her sandwich. "What do you mean?" "It's just a text," I said, trying to sound casual. "Riley, look at me," she said, her brown eyes serious. "They only call when they want something. This is their pattern. They go silent for months. Then they reel you back in with the 'we miss you' bait. And then, bam. Kevin needs to be bailed out of another mess, or they need you to co-sign a loan. It's a trap. Don't fall for it." "Maybe you're being too cynical," I argued, though her words echoed my own fears. "Maybe they just want to see me for Thanksgiving. When was the last time they just wanted to see you?" she countered. "Was it when they came to your apartment and spent the whole time appraising it? Or was it the time your dad called you to ask for free investment advice for his golf buddy? They don't see you, Riley. They see a walking, talking bank account." I knew she was right. Every logical part of my brain knew she was right. But the heart is not a logical organ. The pull of family, even a dysfunctional one, is a powerful primal force. The desire to be loved and accepted by the people who brought you into the world is a wound that never quite heals. I wanted to believe that this time they would put a bandage on it instead of pouring more salt in. I'll just go and see, I told her. I'll be on my guard. If they ask for anything, I'll say no and leave. Simple as that. Sarah sighed, shaking her head slowly. Okay, but please be careful. Your heart isn't as well defended as your bank account is. I decided to go. I texted my mom back. Okay, I'll be there Wednesday evening. Her reply was instantaneous, a single emoji of a smiling face with hearts for eyes. It felt manipulative and fake, but I ignored the feeling. The week before I left, I tried to build up my emotional armor. I rehearsed conversations in my head. I practiced saying no. I promised myself I would not get drawn into any drama. I would be pleasant but distant. I would eat turkey, have a piece of pie, and then drive back to my safe, quiet life in Boise. I even went out and bought gifts. It was a stupid, optimistic gesture, an attempt to grease the wheels, to show that I was coming in good faith. I bought a nice bottle of scotch for my dad, a cashmere scarf for my mom, and a new fancy coffee maker for Kevin and Jessica. I wrapped them beautifully, trying to wrap up my hope along with them. I was extending an olive branch before the battle had even begun. The drive to Idaho Falls was tense. With every mile that passed, the city lights of Boise shrinking in my rearview mirror, the cautious optimism I had manufactured began to crumble, replaced by a familiar, heavy sense of dread. The flat, empty landscape of the Idaho plains felt bleak and unwelcoming. It felt like I was driving backward in time, back to the person I used to be, the girl with the science fair ribbon in a shoebox, the girl who gave up London, the girl who was always expected to give more than she got. By the time I pulled onto my parents' street, my hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. The house looked exactly the same, the porch light on, casting a warm, welcoming glow that I knew was a lie. I took a deep breath before getting out of the car. You are 32 years old, I told myself. You are a successful, independent woman. You are not that little girl anymore. You have power now. You can leave whenever you want. I carried the gifts and a hope I shouldn't have carried up to the front door. And as my mother opened it, her face breaking into a wide, practiced smile, I felt myself shrinking all the same. The trap was set, and I had just willingly, foolishly, walked right in. The moment I stepped inside, the performance began. My mother hugged me, a stiff, papery embrace that smelled of hairspray and something vaguely floral. "Riley, we're so glad you could make it," she chirped, her voice an octave higher than usual. My dad came in from the living room, wiping his hands on a dish towel. "There she is, the big city hotshot," he said, punching me lightly on the arm. It was his version of affection, a gesture that was both a greeting and a subtle jab. Kevin and Jessica were already there, sitting on the couch like they owned the place. Jessica, my sister-in-law, stood up and gave me a hug that was even more brittle than my mother's. "Riley, you look amazing. That jacket must have cost a fortune," she said, her eyes scanning my outfit, her mind clearly calculating the cost. The house was beautiful. My mother had gone all out. The table was already set with the good china, the silverware polished to a mirror shine. The smell of roasting turkey and baking bread filled the air, a sensory assault designed to evoke nostalgia and warmth. It was a carefully constructed stage, and I was the guest of honor, though I had a sinking feeling I was also the intended sacrifice. The first hour was a blur of small talk. They asked about the drive. They commented on the weather. I gave them their gifts, and they gushed with what sounded like genuine appreciation. My dad held up the bottle of scotch, nodding in approval. "The good stuff, huh? Business must be good." It was the first probe, a casual little test of the waters. I deflected, saying it was a gift from a client. We sat down to dinner, and the atmosphere shifted. The casual chatter died down, replaced by a more focused, strategic line of questioning. It was like watching a team of lawyers gather information before a trial. They started with my father. "So, how's work, Riley?" he asked, carving into the golden brown turkey. "Heard you guys closed that big tech merger. That must have meant a fat bonus for you." I kept my answer vague. "It was a good quarter for the firm," I said, focusing on my mashed potatoes. "The whole team worked really hard." My mother jumped in next, her tone light and conversational. "That apartment of yours is just so lovely. But Boise is getting so expensive, isn't it? You must be saving a lot of money to be able to afford a place like that all on your own." "I'm careful with my budget," I replied, the words feeling stiff in my mouth. My stomach was starting to turn. The food, which had smelled so delicious, now seemed heavy and tasteless. I wasn't their daughter visiting for a holiday. I was a subject being interviewed for a financial profile. Then it was my brother's turn. Kevin, who had been mostly quiet, suddenly leaned forward with an air of feigned expertise. I've been thinking about getting into the market myself, he said, puffing out his chest. I've got this huge real estate project in the works. A guaranteed home run, but you're the expert. Any hot tips? Any new investments I should be looking at? He was trying to present himself as my peer, an equal in the world of finance. It was a transparent attempt to validate his own mysterious project, a project no one ever seemed to have any concrete details about. It was always just a big deal, or a game changer. I don't really give investment advice outside of work, Kevin, I said politely. It's a conflict of interest. But the final, most chilling question came from Jessica. She had been watching me all evening, her smile sweet and placid, but her eyes were sharp, missing nothing. She waited for a lull in the conversation, then turned to me, her voice soft and innocent. With that promotion and your investments, and living so frugally, you must have a nice nest egg by now, she said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. It was a piece of information she was confirming, not seeking. Her words hung in the air. A nice nest egg. The phrase was so cloying, so patronizing. My stomach plunged. I looked at her guileless smile, and a cold dread washed over me. How would she know that? How could she be so certain? I was private about my finances. I never discussed specific numbers with them. I didn't answer her. I just took a small bite of stuffing, the bread and herbs turning to paste in my mouth. I felt a profound sense of violation, as if they had somehow picked the new lock on my door and rifled through my private papers while I was sleeping. I felt exposed, vulnerable. They weren't guessing about my financial situation. They were confirming it. The rest of the meal passed in a haze. They moved on to other topics, but the damage was done. The purpose of this dinner was becoming terrifyingly clear. They had lured me here under the guise of family and love, all so they could sit me down and conduct a financial audit over turkey and gravy. The entire evening, every smile, every question, had been a calculated step toward a goal I couldn't yet see but could feel approaching like a storm on the horizon. I was no longer hungry. I just pushed the food around on my plate, the clinking of my fork against the china sounding unnaturally loud in my ears. I felt a desperate urge to run, to get in my car and drive away, back to the safety of my apartment, back to my life where I was in control. But I was paralyzed, trapped by the weight of family tradition and the last dying embers of hope that I was wrong, that this was all just a terrible misunderstanding. After the plates were cleared, my mother announced it was time for dessert. But before she went to the kitchen to get the pie, she stopped. "Riley," she said, her voice filled with a strange, rehearsed warmth. "We have something for you first." And that's when she came back to the table, holding the small blue velvet box. My heart gave that one last, stupid, hopeful flutter. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe Sarah was wrong. Maybe this was a real gift. Maybe this was the moment they finally told me they were proud of who I was, not just what I had. It was the final, cruelest trick of the evening. They let me hope, just for a second before they sprang the trap. The silence in the room thickened as my mother slid the small blue velvet box across the polished surface of the table. It came to a stop just inches from my plate. For a single irrational moment, the narrative I wanted to believe in surged forward. Hope, I've learned, is a stubborn, foolish thing. It will look for light in the deepest of cellars. My mind flashed with images of a graduation gift they'd forgotten to give me, a piece of my grandmother's jewelry they had saved, a peace offering for years of neglect. The box was a prop, and in that moment, I let myself believe it was for a story of reconciliation. I picked it up. The velvet was soft and worn beneath my fingertips. It felt heavy, like it held something of value. I glanced up at my mother, who offered a tight, unreadable smile. My father's expression hadn't changed. He was still watching me with that unnerving, predatory focus. He wasn't a participant in this moment. He was a spectator waiting for the main event to begin. "Go on, open it," Kevin urged, a strange, eager glint in his eye. I lifted the lid. The hope I'd been clinging to dissolved with a silent, sickening pop. There was no gold chain, no sparkling stone. There was only a piece of white paper, folded into a tight square, sitting starkly against the satin lining. It was jarring, wrong. A letter in a jewelry box. My confusion must have been written all over my face. "What is this?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Just read it, honey," my mother said, her voice strained. My fingers felt clumsy as I lifted the paper. It was heavy, like official bank stationery. I unfolded it slowly, a cold dread seeping into my bones. chilling me from the inside out. The letterhead was from a large national bank. There were paragraphs of dense legal jargon, but my eyes, trained to scan documents for key information, found the important parts immediately. The words default notice and immediate payment required jumped out at me, and then I saw the numbers. $250,000. The amount was so large, so astronomical, that it didn't feel real. It was a number from a spreadsheet at work, a figure in a corporate budget, not a number that had anything to do with my life, with my family. My gaze moved upwards, searching for a name, and found it. Kevin R. Thompson. I looked up from the paper, my eyes wide, my mind struggling to connect the dots. The box, the paper, the expectant faces around the table. It was a puzzle, and the final piece was clicking into place with horrifying clarity. "You'll cover this," my dad said. The words were flat, hard, and final. It was the same tone he'd used years ago when he told me my scholarship money was needed for other things. It was the voice of absolute, unquestionable authority. The room started to feel like it was tilting. I held on to the edge of the table to steady myself. "Cover it?" I echoed, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "This is $250,000. What happened?" "It was a business deal," Kevin said quickly, defensively. "A real estate venture. The funding fell through at the last minute. It's a temporary setback." He said the words with a practiced ease, as if he'd rehearsed them. "A temporary setback of $250,000? I asked, my voice shaking with disbelief. My mother stepped in, her voice taking on that soft, pleading tone that had always been her most effective weapon against me. "Riley, please. This is what families do. We support each other. We lift each other up when we fall. You're doing so well for yourself. You've worked so hard." She framed my success not as something for me to be proud of, but as a resource for them to use. My hard work was not for my benefit. It was for theirs. I shook my head, trying to clear the fog of shock. I can't just produce this kind of money. This is everything I have. More than everything." "Oh, don't be so dramatic, Riley," Kevin scoffed, leaning back in his chair with an air of entitled annoyance. "You probably make that in a year." The casual way he dismissed my life's work, the years of struggle and sacrifice, sent a jolt of anger through me. It was so pure, so potent, it momentarily eclipsed the shock. But before I could respond, Jessica, my quiet, smiling sister-in-law, spoke for the first time. Her voice was calm, almost gentle. "Actually," she said, looking directly at me, "we know you can afford it." There was something in her tone, a chilling certainty, that made my blood run cold. It was the same certainty she'd had when she'd mentioned my nest egg. "What is that supposed to mean?" I asked, my voice low. Jessica took a delicate sip of her water. She placed the glass down with a soft click. She didn't look guilty or ashamed. She looked proud, as if she were about to reveal the winning card in her hand. "I work at the bank, Riley," she said, her smile never wavering. "The one where you have your investment portfolio. I'm in the wealth management division." The implication hung in the air, thick and poisonous. I stared at her, my mind refusing to accept what she was saying. It was a violation so profound, so unthinkable I couldn't wrap my head around it. "What did you do, Jessica?" I demanded, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. She had the audacity to shrug, a small, dismissive gesture. "It was for the family. I just needed to see what was possible. I ran a financial profile. It was all very professional. She had gone through my private records. The thought was a physical blow. It was worse than the demand for money. It was worse than my father's coldness or my mother's manipulation. This was a betrayal of a different kind. It was a calculated, deliberate invasion. My finances were the one part of my life I had managed to keep completely separate from them, the one thing that was truly mine. It was my armor, my fortress, and she had just told me she had a key. She had walked through the gates without my knowledge, taken a quiet inventory of all my defenses, and brought that information back to the enemy. "You went into my accounts?" I whispered, horrified. "You looked at my private financial information. That's illegal." "Don't be so dramatic," my father barked, slamming his hand lightly on the table. "She did what she had to do for her husband, for this family. It's not like she stole anything. She stole everything," I shot back, my voice finally breaking free. "She stole my privacy, my security, my trust. Do you have any idea what you've done?" I looked at Jessica, at her calm, unbothered face, and I felt a wave of nausea. "You could lose your job. You could be prosecuted. And you'd be the one to do that to your own sister?" my mother asked, her voice dripping with disappointment. "To the mother of your nephew? Is that who you've become, Riley? Someone who would ruin family over a few dollars?" They had twisted it seamlessly, effortlessly. In their reality, Jessica's illegal and unethical breach of my privacy was a noble act of family loyalty. My reaction, my outrage at being so profoundly violated, was the real crime. I was the selfish one. I was the one threatening to ruin the family. I looked around the table at their faces. My father, rigid with self-righteous anger. My mother, her face a mask of wounded sorrow. My brother, looking smug, as if this were all a brilliant plan that had gone off without a hitch. And Jessica, the architect of my violation, looking at me with cool pity. In that moment, I understood. This wasn't a desperate plea for help. This was an ambush. They hadn't just come to ask for money. They had come with leverage. They had come with my own life, my own hard work, weaponized against me. The velvet box wasn't a gift. It was a cage, and they had just locked the door. The air in the room was thick with their expectations. They were all looking at me, waiting. They had presented their case. They had revealed their trump card, Jessica's intimate knowledge of my finances. In their minds, the negotiation was over. All that was left was my compliance. They had backed me into a corner, and now they were just waiting for me to surrender. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. A wave of dizziness washed over me, and for a second I thought I might be sick. I could feel the familiar pull, the tidal force of a lifetime of conditioning. Give in, keep the peace, sacrifice. It's what you do. It's who you are, the responsible one. But then something else rose up to meet the fear. It was a cold, hard fury, an anger so pure and clarifying it burned away the confusion. It was the ghost of that teenage girl who had given up London. It was the spirit of the young woman who had worked herself to the bone in diners and hospital basements. It was the pride of the woman who had bought her own home, built her own security, all on her own terms. They were trying to take it all, not just the money but the meaning behind it. They were trying to erase the story of my survival and replace it with a final chapter of servitude. My hands were shaking, so I clasped them in my lap, digging my nails into my palms. I took a slow, deliberate breath and then another. I looked at my father, the self-appointed judge and jury of this family. I looked at my mother, the gentle executioner. I looked at my brother, the black hole of entitlement. And I looked at my sister-in-law, the spy. My voice, when it came, was not the whisper they expected. It was quiet, yes, but it didn't shake. It was steady, forged in the fire of my newfound rage. No, the word, my word, fell into the silence. It felt like a declaration of war. My father's face tightened. "We're not asking you, Riley." "I don't care," I said, my gaze unwavering. "The answer is no. This is not my debt. This is not my mess. And this is not my responsibility to fix." Kevin let out a short, bitter laugh. "Unbelievable. After everything this family has done for you." "Done for me?" I shot back, the question sharp with disbelief. "What exactly has this family done for me, Kevin? Besides teach me that my accomplishments were only valuable as a future safety net for you? Come on, sis," he sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. "It's just money." That was the line, the one that broke the dam. The casual, dismissive way he waved his hand, as if the last 15 years of my life, the sweat and exhaustion and sacrifice, were nothing more than an inconvenience to his grand plans. "Just money?" I whispered, the words trembling with the force of my anger. "You think this is just money to me? This money is my freedom. It's the nights I didn't sleep so I could study. It's the vacations I never took. It's the security you have never once had to worry about because you always knew someone else would bail you out. If it's just money, Kevin, then you pay it." That's when I saw the shift in my father's eyes. The cold anger was igniting into pure rage. He had lost control of the situation. His authority, which had been absolute in this house for my entire life, had been challenged. I had refused to follow the script. His chair scraped hard against the hardwood floor as he pushed himself back. The sound was violent, ripping through the tense silence. His hand, shaking with fury, snaked out and gripped his wine glass. I saw his knuckles turn white. "You will show this family some respect," he growled, his voice low and menacing. And then he threw it. It was a singular, explosive act of violence. Not a clumsy spill, but a deliberate, targeted assault. The dark red wine flew across the table in a glittering arc, a missile of his rage. I flinched, a useless, instinctive gesture. The liquid hit my chest with a shocking, cold slap, soaking my blouse in an instant. The glass itself flew past my head, shattering against the wall behind me with a sickening crash. Silence. The only sound was the drip, drip, drip of wine falling from my shirt onto the floor. The cold of the liquid seeped through the fabric, chilling my skin. The smell of alcohol and fermented grapes was overpowering. I sat there, stunned into stillness, the red stain spreading across my chest like a cartoon wound. I looked up. No one was moving. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with a kind of theatrical shock, but she didn't rush to my side. She didn't admonish my father. Kevin and Jessica just stared, their faces blank, as if they were watching a movie. Their inaction was a verdict. They approved. I had stepped out of line, and this was my punishment. In that moment of humiliation, I found a strange, chilling clarity. The last vestiges of hope, the last shred of desire for their approval died. You cannot be betrayed by an enemy. You can only be betrayed by those you trust, by those you love. And I realized, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I no longer loved these people. I didn't know who they were. Slowly, I picked up my cloth napkin and dabbed at my face, my movements calm and deliberate. The adrenaline was gone, replaced by a profound, empty coldness. My mother finally spoke, her voice sharp, cutting. All the soft, pleading warmth was gone. "Well, I hope you're happy, Riley. You've ruined Thanksgiving." She looked at my father, then at me. "If you won't help your brother, then you should leave." It was an ultimatum, but it felt like a gift, an escape hatch, an official, notarized permission slip to leave this life behind. I stood up, my chair making a soft, polite sound against the floor. I looked down at the stain on my shirt, at the shattered glass on the floor, at the cold, hard faces of the people I had once called my family. "You're right," I said, my voice even. "You don't need my help." I paused, letting my eyes meet each of theirs in turn. "I won't be your solution anymore." I turned my back on them, on the wreckage of the dinner, on the entire history of my childhood. I walked out of the dining room, through the hall, and to the front door. I didn't run, I walked. Each step was a conscious decision. With each step, I felt the weight of their expectations, their demands, their endless, draining need, falling away from me like a heavy coat I hadn't realized I was wearing. I opened the front door and stepped out into the cold November night. The air was crisp and clean, a stark contrast to the suffocating atmosphere of the house. As I pulled the door shut behind me, the soft click of the latch sounded like the most liberating sound I had ever heard. I didn't look back. The 3-hour drive back to Boise was a strange, surreal bubble of silence. My car, usually a place of refuge with music playing, was completely quiet. The only sounds were the hum of the engine and the rhythmic thump of the tires on the dark, empty highway. The red wine on my blouse had dried into a stiff, dark stain that smelled faintly sour. It felt like a brand, a physical marker of my expulsion. My mind was a chaotic replay of the last few hours. The velvet box, the default notice, Jessica's chilling admission, my father's face contorted with rage, the shocking cold of the wine. Over and over the scenes played in my head, each time a fresh wave of disbelief, anger, and a deep, hollow sadness washed over me. I wasn't just sad for what had happened tonight. I was grieving for the family I had never truly had, the fantasy I had foolishly kept alive for 32 years. I drove on autopilot, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. The farther I got from Idaho Falls, the more the shock began to recede, replaced by a shaky, post-adrenaline clarity. I had said no. I had walked out. I had chosen myself. It was a terrifying, exhilarating feeling. I had survived the explosion. Now I just had to navigate the fallout. Halfway to Boise, my phone, which I had tossed onto the passenger seat, buzzed. The screen lit up the dark cabin. The caller ID read, "Mom, a jolt of something, fear, hope," shot through me. My first instinct was to ignore it. But what if she was calling to apologize? What if my father had calmed down and they had realized how horrible they had been? It was that same stupid, stubborn hope rearing its head again. Against my better judgment, I pressed the answer button on my steering wheel. "Hello?" I said, my voice wary. It wasn't an apology. "Riley, your father is very upset," she began, her voice cold and accusatory. "I cannot believe how selfish you were tonight. You have torn this family apart." There it was. Not, "Dad is so sorry he assaulted you." Not, "We were wrong to ask that of you, but you made Dad upset. This is your fault." "He threw a glass of wine at me, Mom," I said, my voice flat. "He has a lot of stress right now," she shot back as if that excused everything. "You have no idea the pressure he's under, with your brother's situation. And you just sat there, with all your money and your fancy life, and you wouldn't lift a finger to help. You should be ashamed of yourself." I felt something inside me snap, the last thread of any lingering obligation. "You know what, Mom? I am ashamed. I'm ashamed that I let you all treat me like a bank for 32 years. I'm ashamed that I ever thought you loved me for who I am. Don't call me again." I hung up before she could reply. My hands were shaking, but my mind was calm. The line had been drawn. The door had been slammed shut. An hour later, my phone buzzed again. I glanced at the screen, expecting to see my mother's name again, or perhaps my father's, but it wasn't. The name on the screen made me pause. Grandpa, my father's dad. He was a quiet, stoic man who had lived a hard life. He was a retired farmer who rarely spoke his mind, a man who believed in observation over conversation. We weren't particularly close, but he had always treated me with a quiet kindness that was so different from the transactional nature of my parents' affection. I hesitated for a moment, then answered the call. "Riley?" His voice was old and gravelly, but steady. "Hi, Grandpa," I said, my own voice softer than I expected. "Are you all right? Your grandmother and I left just before things got ugly, but your Aunt Martha called me. She heard from your mother. I got the gist. I'm okay," I lied. "I'm on my way back to Boise." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint crackle of the connection. "No, you're not," he said finally. His voice was firm but not unkind. "But you will be. You're tough. Always have been." Tears pricked my eyes. It was such a simple statement, but it was a piece of validation I had craved my entire life. Someone saw my strength, not as a resource, but as a quality. "Listen to me, Riley," he continued, his voice lowering slightly. "I'm calling because you deserve to know the truth, the whole truth. I've stayed quiet for too long, letting your father run his house his way. That was my mistake, and I'm sorry for it." My breath caught in my throat. An apology. A genuine, unsolicited apology. It was so foreign, I wasn't sure how to respond. "What truth, Grandpa?" He sighed, a long, weary sound that seemed to carry the weight of years. "That debt? That $250,000. It's not from some real estate deal that went sour. That's the story they're telling, the one they probably told you. It's a lie." I gripped the steering wheel tighter. "Then what is it from?" "It's from casinos in Vegas," he said, the words stark and ugly. "It's from a new luxury SUV he bought for Jessica that he couldn't afford. It's from a trip they took to Paris last spring, flying first class. It's from a string of terrible, high-risk stock market bets he made trying to get rich quick. Your brother Riley, he doesn't have a business problem. He has a spending problem, a gambling problem. He lives a life he hasn't earned, and your parents have enabled him every step of the way." The highway lights blurred in front of me as my eyes filled with tears. It was so much worse than I had imagined. They hadn't asked me to save my brother from an unfortunate business failure. They had asked me to pay for his vacations, his luxury cars, his gambling addiction. They had demanded I sacrifice my entire life savings not to rescue him, but to subsidize his reckless, extravagant lifestyle. The wine on my shirt suddenly felt even colder, even more humiliating. My father hadn't just been angry at my refusal. He had been furious that I was threatening the fantasy life they had all been living at Kevin's expense, a life they now expected me to fund. "They know," I whispered, more to myself than to him. "My parents know the truth." "Of course they know," he said, his voice laced with a deep, weary sadness. "They've been covering for him for years. Small amounts at first. A few thousand here, a few thousand there. But it got bigger. This is just the one they can no longer hide. They're terrified of the embarrassment, of what people in town will think. They'd rather sacrifice you than face that." It all clicked into place. The desperation, the elaborate setup, the shocking violation by Jessica. It was the frantic, immoral logic of people trying to conceal a deep, shameful secret. "I'm sorry, kiddo," my grandpa said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry I stayed quiet for too long. I kept telling myself it wasn't my place. But seeing you, seeing the good, strong woman you've become, I couldn't let you believe their lies. You are not their solution. You are not their secret keeper. You are worth more than that." The tears I had been holding back finally broke free. They streamed down my face, hot and silent. They weren't tears of sadness anymore. They were tears of relief, of validation, of a deep, profound gratitude. For the first time in my entire life, someone in that family had chosen me. Someone had chosen truth over convenience. Someone had chosen my well-being over the family's carefully constructed image. "Thank you, Grandpa," I sobbed into the phone. "Thank you. You just get yourself home safe," he said gently. "And you don't look back. You hear me? You just keep building that good life you made for yourself." We said our goodbyes, and I ended the call. The silence in the car returned, but it was different now. It was no longer empty. It was filled with the strength of my grandfather's words. The truth hadn't just set me free. It had armed me. The battle wasn't just mine anymore. I wasn't alone. Arriving back at my apartment in Boise in the early hours of the morning felt like a soldier returning from a war zone. The moment I stepped inside and locked the door behind me, I was hit by an overwhelming wave of exhaustion and relief. I dropped my keys on the counter, leaned against the door, and just breathed. The air in my own home felt different, clean, safe, entirely mine. The first thing I did was strip off the wine-stained blouse. I held it for a moment, the fabric stiff and smelly, a tangible symbol of their disrespect. I didn't put it in the laundry. I walked it directly to the trash chute at the end of the hall and dropped it in. As I listened to it fall down the long shaft, I felt a sense of finality. It was over. But the next morning, I knew I couldn't just move on. My grandfather's call had armed me with the truth, and Jessica's actions had been a profound violation that I couldn't ignore. This wasn't just a family squabble anymore. This was about protecting the life I had built. My first call was to my bank. I didn't go to the local branch. I called the National Corporate Security Hotline. I explained in a calm, measured voice that I had reason to believe a wealth management employee, Jessica Thompson, had accessed my private financial records without my consent for personal reasons. I didn't yell. I didn't get emotional. I just stated the facts. The man on the other end of the line was silent for a moment, and then his tone became incredibly serious. An official investigation was launched immediately. He assured me my accounts would be flagged with the highest level of security. My second call was to Sarah. I told her everything, from the velvet box to Grandpa's revelation about the gambling debts. She was quiet for a long time, and when she finally spoke, her voice was steely. "Good," she said. "You did the right thing walking out. Now we build a wall so high they can never even peek over it again." Over the next few days, with Sarah's legal guidance, I took systematic steps to untangle myself from my family completely. I moved my investment portfolio to a different financial institution. I changed my bank accounts, my passwords, my security questions. I scrubbed any connection that they might have to my life. Every action felt like another brick being laid in my fortress wall. It was methodical, empowering work. Meanwhile, the fallout in Idaho Falls began. My grandfather, a man of few words but immense integrity, didn't keep the truth to himself. He told my Aunt Martha, his daughter. He told my Uncle Bill. The story that spread through the family wasn't my mother's version, the one about the ungrateful daughter who had abandoned her struggling brother. The story that spread was the true one, the one about the gambling debts, the luxury vacations, and the demand that Riley pay for it all. The consequences were quiet, but swift. My aunt called me, her voice full of shame and anger at my parents. "I'm so sorry, Riley, we had no idea. There is always a chair for you at our table. Always." The whispers spread through their small town. At church, my father, who prided himself on being a respected member of the community, found that people's handshakes weren't as firm. Conversations would stop when he approached. The story, in its ugliest form, had taken root. The biggest blow, however, landed on Jessica. The bank's internal investigation was swift and ruthless. In the world of finance, client privacy is sacred. Her actions were not just unethical, they were a massive liability. She was suspended, and a week later, she was fired. The professional reputation she had carefully built was shattered. Her career in wealth management was over. Of course, their calls and texts started flooding my phone. At first, they were furious. My mother sent a long, rambling text accusing me of trying to destroy the family, of being hateful and vindictive for reporting Jessica. "She has a child to support. How could you be so cruel?" I didn't reply. Then, as their isolation grew and the consequences of their actions settled in, the tone shifted from furious to pleading. From my dad, "Okay, maybe I overreacted. Let's just talk about this." From my mom, "We miss you. The house is so quiet without you. Please call me." From Kevin, "I can't believe you did this to Jessica. You've ruined her life over some stupid money. I hope you're happy." But not once was there an apology. Not a single text that said, "We were wrong," or, "I'm sorry I hurt you." Their messages were all about them, their pain, their inconvenience, their desire for me to come back and fix the mess they had created. They didn't miss me. They missed my function. They missed the person who would absorb their problems and make them disappear. I didn't block their numbers. I wanted to see their attempts. I wanted to have a clear record of their manipulation, but I never replied. My silence was a boundary they could not cross. It was a solid, impenetrable wall. The best calls were the ones from my grandpa. He would call me every Sunday evening just to check in. He never talked about my parents or Kevin. He would ask me about my work, about my friends, about the book I was reading. He told me stories about his farm, about my grandmother's prize-winning roses. Our conversations were simple, easy, and rooted in a genuine care for my well-being. One evening, he said something that stuck with me. "You know, Riley, some trees in an orchard are planted too close together. They fight for the same sun, the same water. They never grow strong. Sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is cut one down to save the others." It's hard, but it lets the sun in. I finally understood. I hadn't destroyed my family. My family was already diseased, choked by secrets and entitlement. I hadn't torn them apart. I had simply stepped away from the rot. I had chosen to find my own son. For the first time in my life, I began to understand that family wasn't about blood. It was about choice. It was about who chose to stand with you in the light and who chose to leave you in the dark. My aunt, my uncle, my grandfather, they were my family. They had chosen me, and that choice was a foundation I could finally start to build on. Now, almost a year later, my life in Boise is quiet. The quiet I used to mistake for loneliness, I now recognize as peace. I wake up early when the sky is still a soft, hazy gray. I go for a run along the river, the cool morning air filling my lungs, the rhythm of my feet on the pavement a steady, calming beat. My world is small and manageable, and most importantly, mine. I still work as a financial analyst. I still love the clean, cold logic of numbers. But my relationship with money has changed. It's no longer just armor. It's a tool. It's the tool that allows me to donate to a local women's shelter. It's the tool that lets me fly my aunt and grandpa to Boise for a long weekend, just because. It's the tool that allows me to live a life free from the kind of desperate fear that drove my parents to do what they did. My apartment, my fortress, now feels like a home. The locks are still on the doors, but I've started letting people in. Sarah comes over for dinner every week. My aunt sends me cuttings from my grandmother's rose bushes, which I'm trying, with mixed success, to grow in pots on my balcony. The space is filled not with expensive things, but with a sense of calm security that I have built for myself, on my own terms. My mother still sends texts. They arrive every few weeks like clockwork. They are always the same. Thinking of you. We miss you. There is never an apology. Never an acknowledgement of the pain they caused. The words are just empty hooks, cast out into the water, hoping I will bite. I used to feel a pang of something. Guilt? Sadness? When I saw her name on my screen. But now I feel nothing but a distant pity. I read the words and then I delete them. I don't reply. I don't engage. My silence is not a punishment. It is a boundary. It is the answer to a question they never had the courage to ask. I've learned a lot this past year. I've learned that love isn't an obligation you are born into. It's a choice you make every day. I've learned that family isn't about a shared last name, but about shared respect. I've learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to walk away from the people who are incapable of loving you the way you deserve. The red wine stain is long gone, but I'll never forget it. It was a mark of my humiliation, but it was also the catalyst for my liberation. They thought that by throwing the wine, they were marking me as worthless, but they were wrong. They were marking the end of my servitude. They were, unintentionally, setting me free. Boundaries aren't a betrayal. They are the purest form of self-preservation. They are survival. So let me ask you, have you ever set a boundary they called betrayal? Tell me in the comments. And before you go, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story with someone who needs to hear it, because walking away wasn't an act of anger. It was the first time I truly chose love, my own.